and welcome to the At Podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts. This is a podcast that is committed to helping you navigate whatever waters you find yourself in, turbulent or not. After years of interviewing people working at turbulent intersections of faith and industry or leadership and religion, what Dan Portnoy, producer of this show, and I discovered and decided was that the best way, the most helpful thing that I could do was actually to answer your questions more directly. So I take a set of questions every week at Instagram, and then I build a podcast, usually around 2, maybe 3 of those questions. And oftentimes the questions we're selecting, either they come up in clusters, there's kind of a theme. Oftentimes we're, sometimes going through a lot of the same stuff. Or it's a question that has come up a lot in my coaching conversations or spiritual direction conversations. And so I'll select 3 of those and build a podcast episode around them. This week, I'm building a podcast episode around unpredictability and dealing with change, around the relationship and the tension between prayer and action, and then around this question about identity. So we're going to talk about change, we're going to talk about prayer and action, and we're going to talk about identity. Starting with this question, and I love how generalized this question is. This big, broad question. It's not even phrased like a question. It says how to handle unpredictability. So how does one handle unpredictability? Let it win. What we come to know over the course of years, if we're paying attention, is that unpredictability, instability, change is the norm, and that I'm not going to come to a place of arrival. I need to embrace the reality that life is constantly on the move and let go of the desire, maybe even the need I have to land and to get things right and to stay in the same place and achieve security. In the spiritual formation world, one of the great gifts I've been offered as a person in direction, and even as a spiritual director, is this prayer. And there are several versions of it. They are all slightly different, but they're the same prayer. It's called the welcoming prayer. And I won't get all the way into to really do like a teaching on the welcoming prayer would require like several podcasts and people who are far more adept at this kind of educational piece than I am. But I'm going to read you through the prayer, and we'll talk about what I experience when I read the prayer, and what this prayer has done for me and for others around me, as kind of a way to talk about the first half of the answer to the question, how to deal with unpredictability. I need to let go of my desire and need for life to stop moving. I need to let go of the expectations I have about life. And this is a prayer that actually gets me to this. And the prayer reads like this: welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome everything that comes to me in this moment because I know it is for my healing. I welcome all thoughts, feelings, emotions, people, situations, and conditions. I let go of my desire for security. I let go of my desire for approval. I let go of my desire for control. I let go of my desire to change any situation, condition, person, or myself. I open myself to the presence and love of God within. This is a prayer that, depending on the situation, can stir a bit of discomfort because, and there are lots of reasons to it. There are lots of reasons for that. The main one I've come across is that we are trained in our lives to use our very language, to use our religion, to use our finances, to develop a security and to gain some form of control on life. That everything, our education, our the money we make, even our religious training, oftentimes is angled at some point, if I can get my dollars and cents in order, if I can live in the right place, if I can get the right relationship, then make that relationship work. If I can get my religion in place and get my spiritual life, and then I will have achieved this kind of safe space. I will have arrived somewhere. That's a control narrative. And all of those expectations, all of those desires, all of those maybe even needs, they get disappointed. When I get to a place of security in my life, if you've lived long enough, you know this. If I get to a place of security, I won't be there very long. At some point, usually pretty quickly, the things that make me feel secure either like disappoint me in some way or they're taken from me. We learn over the course of life that life is constantly changing. This prayer invites me into a different posture, that I'm letting go of this says desire. Other forms of this prayer will actually use the word need. I'm letting go of the desire for security, the desire for approval, the desire for control, even the desire to change any situation, condition, person, or myself. Now, does that mean like I stop working to change things? I just kind of let things happen? No. I don't want to let go of the work I'm doing entirely. I don't want to stop working at the things that I'm working on to make a difference in people's lives. So what I'm letting go of is the mathematics in my mind. If I do this and then this happens, then I'll be happy. I need to let go of that. I need to let go of the desire I have for some form of security, some form of achieving stasis. That's what this prayer invites me into. And I need to let go of that because I think that the fundamental root of life is that the invitation is not to work to a place of security or safety. The invitation is constant and continual change. The invitation is that I will continue to grow. I think the invitation of the core of life, the divine invitation of the core of life, is that I would continue to grow and change and evolve. That's, I think, the constant, that is the constant. So we experience it as change. We experience it as unpredictability because my hope and my expectation is that at some point things will become predictable. Things will become, things will get secure and I'll get the ground beneath my feet and then I get to stay there. What if the actual invitation in life is that when you have some sure footing, it's not going to last for a while. And so in that time and in that place, we do what the prayer invites us to, is we welcome everything that comes to us in that moment because we know it's for my healing and for my benefit. This moment in its security, this moment even in its uncertainty, both the security and the uncertainty of any given moment is actually for my benefit, for my growth, and for my healing, so that whatever kind of security or safety I have is not dependent on my circumstances around me. It's not dependent on certain things happening. It's actually in here that I'm prepared for what happens next, and I'm ready to and even desirous of change and growth within me. So how do I handle unpredictability? I plan for it by knowing that whatever comes up today is actually for my evolution, for my growth, for my healing, so that I would continue to become, I would continue to grow, and that I would find peace within me regardless of what's happening around me and in my circumstances. Second question for this week's podcast, another really interesting question, and a great one when it comes to spiritual formation is, this person says, tension in prayer and action right now with all that's happening in the world, how to be. Tension in prayer and action right now with all this happening in the world, how to be. So I'll start at the end. My answer here ends with these book recommendations, with a book recommendation. I'll give you two. Thomas Merton, a number of years ago, wrote a book called Contemplation in the World of Action. It's a great book, and he approaches this conversation, this question, obviously from the standpoint of someone who lives as a monk and who is committed to teaching predominantly prayer. But he was also teaching prayer and the contemplative life during a turbulent, what we recognize now historically as a turbulent time in the 1960s. 60s and 70s with the civil rights movement and a number of other places in which there was lots and lots of tension. It seemed like everything was on fire. It does seem like everything is on fire now. So I would highly recommend that book. If you're someone experiencing that tension, like you want to live with a contemplative posture, you also want to achieve things and change things in the world, check out Thomas Merton's book, Contemplation in a World of Action. Also, Parker Palmer's book, The Active Life, which actually comes to the conversation through the other doorway. He's more of an activist who's learning the contemplative angle to that. So both those books, great recommendations. I will go to 40,000 feet here, and I'll say this, that a prayer life that does not lead to forms of action is an incomplete prayer life, in the same way that an active life And an active life that doesn't put me in a position of prayer or lead me to prayer is also an incomplete active life. What I think happens is the human soul desires, if I'm prayerfully engaging with the world, I will develop specific desires to act. If I'm praying specifically around about things that like I see wrong, and this is kind of the context of this, that with so much that's happening in the world, if I'm praying about things that are not right in the world, if I'm lovingly trying to attach myself or ask God to do things, if I'm prayerly attaching myself to a world that has needs, what I think naturally happens is that I develop particular attachments. Attachments might not be the word there. A particular focus, and I will be led to at least the desire of some form of action. And if I'm not doing that, if I'm not finding myself wanting to act, it might not be prayer in the way we mean it. It might kind of just be like a sentimental thinking. Like I'm sentimentally thinking about gun violence. I'm sentimentally thinking about race and racial reconciliation. A deeper prayer life, an actual prayer life, like attaches me and it puts me in connection with a God who is reconciling all things to God's self. And that movement, when it draws me in, leads me to action. In the same way, in an active life, I think part of the desire of the active life is actually not just to get things done, but that we would get in the stream of the reconciliation of all things. And that when we do that, we recognize how massive some of these issues are. And that an active life, a truly and deep active life, actually puts me in a position to see how little I can actually do. And that leads me to a place of prayer. So this, and this is what I wrote to this person, is I think this tension in us between our prayer lives and our active lives actually is an invitation to integration. It's an invitation. Like what am I praying about, and can I draw a through line from the topics in my prayer life to how I'm spending my money and how and my time. And if I look at the ways in which I'm acting in the world, am I actually positioning myself to be in a place of overwhelm? If things really are overwhelming, am I in a place of overwhelm so that I am looking for help to achieve and fix and heal in the way that I would like to? In both those places, or in the tension between those things, go sit with a spiritual director. Go sit with someone who can help you navigate those things, because everything there is about everything that happens in between there, like those particular tensions, they are very particular. What is it that you actually care about? Is your prayer life actually leading you to particular cares? And then when you can identify those particular cares, what kind of plans can you put in place to actually act in those ways, act in those spheres? And in your active life, where you're working towards justice or reconciliation or healing or whatever it is you're doing, are you actually in a position in which you're like taking risks that push you beyond your own capabilities? Or is your active life just in a place where you've got things in control and you're only giving away what you feel like you can afford to give away? How can we get you to a place where you're extending a little bit beyond yourself and you're actually positioning yourself to be in touch with the reconciliation of all things, which always feels bigger than us and always leads us to a place to ask for help beyond what we can do? Last question. This person writes, I've got a family member who's dying of Alzheimer's, and I'm thinking about the separation of mind and spirit. If I forget everything and everyone, am I still me? So this person's got a family member who's dying of Alzheimer's, and they're thinking about the connection between their memory, their cognitive abilities, and their identity. So first of all, and I said this here, man, it's hard. Having been with people who lived through and then died by way of Alzheimer's, that's a really, really tough go. So I'm sorry. That sucks. That's really, really hard. And we're not going to move through to the answer. Some things, talk about overwhelm. Some things are just flat out hard, and there's no fix for them. They're just really difficult. One of the questions that comes up, if you or someone who lives with Alzheimer's, or you're around people who live with Alzheimer's, one of the questions that comes up a lot is this question of identity. That like if you lose a sense of connection in memory or in identification, like you see someone and they and they don't recognize who you are they the same person? This forces and invites a question about identity that I think is super important. Here's my take. Brief though it may be, I'm going to try to point to some other resources that are beyond me. American hyperindividuality has sort of convinced us, on the whole, that I am who I am in a vacuum, and that my identity is one more thing I hold together by force of my memory, by force of my will, by force of even of my practices. That like I am myself in my own life, in my own body. This is me, and then that's you over there. American hyperindividuality has convinced us that my identity is a very personal, very individual experience of myself. And then if I lose, again, this is another control narrative. If I lose the ability to recognize myself, if I lose the ability to hold together my own life, then I've lost a piece of my identity. What I would suggest is that how I recognize myself, my experience of myself is an aspect of my identity, but there is a massive part of who I am that actually belongs to other people, that you hold part of who I am in a way that I don't. Part of what it means to be a person, part of what it means to have an identity is that other people hold pieces of who we are. Part of who you are actually belongs to other people. And I know that that is counter to a whole lot of like weird pop psychology, but man, just about every religious culture over the course of human history will point at this reality. And even if you look into like the deep physics of human experience and reality, like the actual physical lines between me and you, they don't really exist. So do you lose? If I forget everything and everyone, am I still me? Yes. And hopefully, and maybe even thankfully, that's because there are people around you who will not have forgotten those things. When you forget who you are, whether it's Alzheimer's or not, when you forget who you are, part of what it means to live a full human life is that someone else has remembered an aspect of who you are that you forgot, and that means you still get to be you. I get to hold an aspect of who you are. I get to hold an experience of who you are, and that is now part of your identity. American hyperindividuality has stolen from us the deeper truth of identity, which is that we do not belong to ourselves. Part of who we belong to is ourselves. We also belong to the people we've lived our life with, and the deeper part of it, we belong to a divine person who actually holds together all things. The things we see, the things we don't see, the things we know about ourselves, the things we don't know about ourselves, the things we like about ourselves, the things we don't like about ourselves. You are held together by hands way bigger, way stronger, way kinder, way more loving than yours. Some of those hands exist on this planet, and some of those hands are divine hands that are holding your life together. So do you still get to be you if you forget everything and everyone? Yes, you do, and that's the gift of identity. Identity is, in fact, a gift and not an achieved reality, and not a reality we hold together by way of our controls, which is part of why I do what I do, which is coach and provide spiritual direction so that I can hold pieces of who you are and remind you of those things as best as possible. It's also why we run this podcast. So I have been wrapping up the podcast every week by reading an excerpt or a poem, a prayer from this book that Scott Erickson and I put together. Scott Erickson and I will be releasing this in October of this year, October 7th. And this prayer, this poem is appropriate for this session. Most people don't put deep friendships on their bucket list, but most people, before they kick the bucket, say one of their greatest regrets was losing touch with their friends. May this low remind me of the grand tour available to me in an everyday life, adventured with close friends. Until next time.